Imagine finding a bag full of money in the back seat of your taxi. It could solve all your problems, right? But what if fate presented you with a much harder choice? In today's story, an elderly taxi driver stumbles upon a fortune that could change his and his granddaughter's lives forever. But a desperate young woman, trying to save her mother, says something that turns everything upside down. Faced with a moral dilemma and mounting debts, he must make the toughest decision of his life. What would you do in his place? Stay until the end, because the final twist will leave you speechless. Sometimes life puts the solution right in front of us, but the real question is, at what cost? The rain fell in a monotonous cadence against the taxi's windshield, mixing with the blinking lights of the city. New York never slept, but on that cold night, Sam felt utterly disconnected from the hustle and bustle around him. The streets pulsed with life, people running with umbrellas, cars honking in a chaotic symphony. But for Sam, it all felt like a distant backdrop, a play in which he no longer had a role. The radio, which had been silent for hours, finally came to life with a soft melody. It was an old song, the kind that brought back long dormant memories. Sam's heart tightened. "I miss you, Evelyn." The words escaped his lips in a barely audible whisper as he looked at the empty passenger seat beside him. That was where she used to sit during the rare night drives they took together, when the taxi was not just his livelihood, but also the setting for their deepest conversations. Sam gripped the steering wheel, trying to push away the pain that clutched at his chest, but the memories wrapped around him like the fog forming outside. Evelyn had been gone for 3 years, and since then, every mile driven on those streets felt like a one-way ticket to loneliness. A discreet vibration on Sam's cell phone brought him back to the present. He picked up the device from the passenger seat and saw his granddaughter Cecily's name. "Grandpa, I need to talk to you about college. Do you think you can help me with the tuition?" The message was straightforward, without any fluff. Cecily had never been one to ask for help unless she truly needed it, and Sam knew that. His heart sank even further. He pulled the taxi over to the side of the road, the raindrops creating a muffled sound on the car's roof. With a heavy sigh, he opened his wallet and counted the coins inside. The total barely covered the fuel for the week. Desperation began to take hold. He had promised his daughter on her deathbed that he would take care of Cecily, that he would secure the girl's future. But here he was, an exhausted old man, unable to provide even the bare minimum she needed. He could still see his daughter looking at him with tenderness in that last memory. "Promise me, Dad, that you'll take care of her. She needs you." Those were her final words before Sam's world crumbled. Now he felt like he was failing both his daughter and Cecily. He hesitated before responding to the message, typing and deleting several times, ultimately deciding to set his phone aside, lacking the courage to give a definitive answer. It was nearly midnight when Sam finished his shift. The back seat of the taxi was cluttered with remnants of passengers, crumpled magazines, forgotten papers, and, to his surprise, a worn leather suitcase. He furrowed his brow. Surely some passenger had left this behind by mistake. He pulled the suitcase with difficulty, feeling its considerable weight. He moved it to the front seat and, with trembling hands, unfastened the clasps. What he found inside took his breath away. Stacks of cash, carefully organized. Sam blinked several times, trying to process the scene. There was a lot of money, more than he had ever seen at once. His heart began to race. What did this mean? For a moment, he allowed himself to fantasize. He envisioned the bills he could pay, the debts that might vanish like magic. He could finally help Cecily pay for her college and even save a little for both of them. A chance to start anew. His body trembled with a mix of hope and desperation. But, like a cold wave, guilt soon washed over him. This wasn't his. He looked around as if someone might emerge from the darkness to demand the suitcase back. Reality weighed heavily on his shoulders. He realized he was holding something that didn't belong to him. something that could belong to someone else who was just as desperate. The dilemma gnawed at him from within as he sat there, in the silence of the taxi, his hands still shaking over the suitcase full of money. Deep down, he knew that whatever he chose to do next would change everything. Life had given him an opportunity, or a trap. The key turned in the lock with a soft click, and Sam entered the house quietly. The soft light in the kitchen was still on, and he knew what he would find. Cecily, as always, was sitting at the table, surrounded by books and notes. Her face was partially hidden by the glow of the lamp, but Sam could see the dark circles under her eyes. Fatigue seemed to have carved lines into the youthful face of his granddaughter, lines that shouldn't have been there. He felt a tightening in his chest. She was focused, biting the pencil as she read, but when she heard the door close, she looked up, forcing a smile. "Hi, Grandpa." Her voice was low, almost defeated. "I'm sorry about earlier. I didn't mean to pressure you about college. I know we're going through a tough time. She hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "I just wanted things to be different." Sam stood still for a moment, unsure of what to say. He wanted to comfort her, but the words wouldn't come. He wanted to say he had a solution, that everything would be okay. The image of the suitcase full of money pulsed in his mind like a dirty secret, burning his conscience. He opened his mouth, but guilt silenced him. How could he talk about that? Instead, he simply nodded and gave a weak smile. "It's all right, Cecily. You don't need to apologize. We'll figure this out somehow." The silence that followed was deafening. Sam sat down in the armchair, trying to focus on anything other than the suitcase or his granddaughter's tired gaze. The TV was on, some old show playing, but the sound made no sense. The truth was that the weight of what he carried, both in the taxi and in his heart, was crushing his soul. He knew he had to do something. But what? Keep the money? Return it? He couldn't think of a way out that wouldn't hurt him in some way. The night dragged on, silent and restless. Sam tossed and turned in bed, his eyes fixed on the dark ceiling, where shadows danced to the rhythm of passing headlights outside. The clock beside the bed indicated it was already 2 a.m, but sleep refused to come. His mind was tumultuous, an incessant battle between desperation for a solution and the guilt that grew with each passing second. Giving up on sleep, he got up slowly, his bare feet touching the cold floor. He descended the stairs carefully, feeling as if he were invading his own home. Deep down, he knew he was about to do something wrong, but the temptation was too great. He headed straight for the closet where he had hidden the suitcase. Upon opening it, the shine of the money seemed to mock him. The stacked bills were there, waiting to solve all his problems. Sam took out a small portion of the money, enough for a few groceries. He dressed quickly and left the house, driving to the 24-hour market around the corner. Guilt accompanied him with every step between the aisles. Each item he placed in the cart felt heavier than it should: bread, milk, some vegetables. He glanced at the price tags with a sense of defeat. It wasn't the money that made him feel this way, but the way he had obtained it. On the way back, he passed by an open bookstore. An impulse led him to buy some new books, remembering how much Cecily loved to read, even on the toughest days. For a moment, he allowed himself to feel a flicker of satisfaction. Perhaps, just perhaps, this would make her happy. When he arrived home, Sam left the bags in the kitchen and arranged the books on Cecily's table. He stared at them for a while, imagining the smile on her face when she saw them in the morning. For the first time in a long while, he smiled back, a nearly forgotten feeling. However, before he climbed back up the stairs to his room, the weight of guilt returned like a violent wave. That money wasn't his. He had betrayed his own values, and yet he knew this was just the beginning of something much larger. Dawn brought a cloudy sky and a sense of anticipation. Sam descended the stairs with a heavy heart, unsure of what to expect. When he entered the kitchen, he found Cecily already awake, standing in front of the table with the new books in hand. Her eyes were wide, a mix of surprise and curiosity. She looked at Sam with a questioning expression, lifting one of the books. "Where did this come from, Grandpa?" she asked, her eyes searching for an answer. Sam hesitated, panic beginning to take hold. He hadn't thought of a lie, hadn't planned what he would say. His thoughts raced, trying to find a way out. I had saved a little money," he lied, tasting the bitter flavor of the lie in his mouth. "I thought you might need some new books for studying." Cecily frowned, clearly skeptical. She knew Sam better than he imagined. She always understood the financial difficulties they faced. She knew he couldn't afford to make purchases like that, especially not something he considered a luxury at that moment. "Saved?" she repeated, her tone dripping with doubt. "Grandpa, you didn't need to do this. We're not in an easy situation." He swallowed hard, unable to hold her gaze for long. "Don't worry, dear. Everything is under control." But deep down, both of them knew it wasn't. The disappointment in Cecily's eyes was unmistakable, even as she tried to hide it. The truth hung between them like a heavy cloud ready to burst. She gave a half smile, an effort not to worsen the situation, and placed the books back on the table. "Thank you, Grandpa," she said softly, but without the same confidence as before. The tension between them was palpable. Sam could feel the bond of trust they had slowly fraying, corroded by secrets and lies. The silence that followed was heavier than any unspoken word. If you're enjoying this emotional story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. This is super important for the growth of the channel and helps me keep bringing more stories like this one. Now, let's continue with the story. Cecily woke up that morning with a sense of unease. Something was wrong, and she couldn't quite put her finger on it. There was a restlessness in her chest, an intuition that wouldn't let her be. In recent days, the subtle shifts in her grandfather's behavior had left her intrigued. The lie about the new books, the increasingly frequent silence, and the hesitation in his answers made something inside her scream for answers. When Sam left for another day of work, Cecily could no longer ignore the foreboding feeling. She looked around the house, trying to find an explanation, any clue. The sensation that her grandfather was hiding something ate away at her. She began rummaging through drawers and cabinets, searching for a truth she didn't yet know. Then, as she opened the closet in Sam's room, her eyes landed on an old leather suitcase, tucked away at the back behind some coats. Cecily furrowed her brow. She had never seen that suitcase before. Her heart raced as she pulled the suitcase out and opened it. What she found inside took her breath away. The shock coursed through her body like an electric jolt. There was a vast amount of money inside, far more than she could ever imagine. She stood still for a few seconds, trying to comprehend what was happening. It was too much money, far more than her grandfather would ever have. The first question that sprang to her mind was devastating. Where did this come from? When Sam returned home later that day, he found Cecily in the middle of the living room, the suitcase open at her feet. Her face was pale and her eyes sparkled with tears she was trying to hold back. "Grandpa, what is this?" Her voice trembled, caught between fear and disbelief. "Did you steal this money?" Sam froze. The ground seemed to have disappeared beneath his feet. He looked at the suitcase, then at Cecily, desperately trying to find an explanation, but the words wouldn't come. The guilt he had tried to suppress hit him with full force. Cecily, seeing that he wasn't responding, stepped forward, her face now dominated by disappointment. "I can't believe you did this," she murmured, tears now flowing freely. "I thought you were different, that you were the man I've always admired." Those words pierced him like a knife. Sam tried to open his mouth, but the knot in his throat prevented him from saying anything. Cecily shook her head in denial, shocked and shaken. "I trusted you," she shouted, her voice cutting through the air like a lash. "You're not the man I thought you were, Grandpa. Not anymore." She ran to her room and slammed the door behind her. Sam stood there, unsure of what to do. The fragile bond that remained between them had been destroyed in an instant, and he found himself once again alone with his mistake. Dazed and consumed by guilt, Sam spent the rest of the afternoon unsure of what to do. The fight with Cecily echoed in his mind like an endless nightmare. He wandered through the house like a ghost, unable to erase the look of disappointment in her eyes. But despite the pain he felt, something inside him urged him to act. He couldn't leave things like this. He needed to discover the truth about that money. Perhaps it would give him direction, an answer to the chaos he had created. He returned to the closet where the suitcase had been stored and, with trembling hands, began to examine its contents more carefully. Among the stacks of bills, a small crumpled piece of paper caught his attention. It was a receipt, wrinkled, from a local hospital. He frowned. That hospital was relatively close, and the name on the receipt was for someone named Elowen. Whatever was happening seemed to be connected to her. With newfound determination, Sam stuffed the receipt into his pocket and left the house. But he left the bag behind. As he drove through the streets of New York, the gray sky reflected the weight in his heart. He didn't know what he expected to find, but he needed answers. Upon arriving at the hospital, the atmosphere filled him with anxiety. The main lobby was bustling with people rushing back and forth, but Sam went to the reception desk and inquired about Elowen. The receptionist looked at him with curiosity but pointed him toward a wing where he could get more information. Walking through the cold, silent corridors of the hospital, Sam felt his stomach churn. When he finally reached the designated ward, he found a young woman sitting alone in a chair in the corner of the room, her head in her hands. Her face was marked by exhaustion, and he knew immediately that this was Elowen. The weight of what he was about to discover was overwhelming. Sam watched Elowen for a few seconds before approaching. She was sitting alone in a chair in the corner of the room, her head in her hands. Her shoulders were slumped with exhaustion, and the tears streaming down her face revealed the depth of her despair. He hesitated as he approached, unsure of what to say, but feeling that he needed to do something. Elowen didn't even notice him at first, lost in her sorrow. "Elowen?" Sam called softly. She lifted her head abruptly, wiping her face with her hands, trying to pull herself together. Her eyes, red and swollen from crying, were focused on something distant, her mind clearly overwhelmed by her situation. Elowen also didn't remember that Sam was the taxi driver she had ridden with, most likely due to the worried mind and anxiety she had been carrying that day. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice shaky, visibly surprised that someone knew her name. "How do you know me?" Sam hesitated, thinking about how to respond. He couldn't, or rather, didn't know how to explain that he was the taxi driver who had found the bag. Instead, he opted for something more vague. "I heard about you and your mother," he said, trying to sound neutral. "How is she?" Elowen sighed deeply, her entire body trembling. "She's not well. The doctors say the treatment is her last chance, but She stopped, her voice faltering again. "I don't know what I'm going to do. I lost something very important. If I don't find it..." She choked on the words, fighting back tears. Sam felt a stab of guilt pierce him. He knew the something she was referring to was the bag, and that he was sitting there with the power to ease her suffering. But at the same time, the fear of how the situation would unfold kept him frozen. He forced himself to keep calm, feeling increasingly torn between his empathy and the secret he was holding. "It must be so hard for you," he replied, with as much compassion as he could muster. "Is there any way I can help?" Elowen shook her head in despair, tears flowing again down her face. "The only thing that can help is the money for the treatment, and without it, I don't know how I'm going to go on. I can't lose my mother. She's always done everything for me, and now that she needs me, I'm failing her." Sam felt the weight of her words as if they were a burden on his own shoulders. He sat silently for a moment, watching how devastated she was. Elowen's words hit him deeply, but he still couldn't find the courage to confess that he had the bag. All he could do was sit there, unsure of when or how he would reveal the truth. "I'm sorry," he said, his heart heavy. "Sometimes things seem impossible, but maybe something will change." Elowen didn't respond. She just looked down, her hands trembling with anxiety. Sam watched her, feeling powerless and full of regret for still keeping his silence, as the weight of his decision grew even heavier. Sam left the hospital with a heavy heart, Elowen's words echoing in his mind. "My mother is dying," she had said, and the reality of the situation tightened around his chest like a knot he couldn't untie. He walked the streets of New York at night, but his thoughts were elsewhere, in a distant time when things were simpler. The bright lights of the skyscrapers contrasted with the darkness that dominated his mind. He passed by places he and Evelyn used to visit, the cafe on the corner where they met, the bookstore where they spent hours leafing through books they would never buy, and the little park where she always insisted on stopping to see the flowers, even in winter. Memories flooded back, and the pain of Evelyn's absence was almost physical. He could hear her voice, soft yet firm, as if she were still by his side. "Do the right thing, Sam," she would say, as she always did when he was lost. But what was the right thing now? Return the suitcase and leave Cecily helpless? Or keep the money and bear the weight of condemning someone he barely knew? Sam stopped in front of the Brooklyn Bridge, watching the reflection of the lights on the water of the river. The city continued to pulse around him, but he was trapped in his own dilemma. "Do the right thing," Evelyn's voice repeated in his mind, but the choice felt unbearable. The money could solve his problems and ensure a future for Cecily, but the awareness that he would be destroying another person's life gnawed at him from within. As the night wore on, the cold began to seep into his bones, but Sam couldn't move. He was frozen between two worlds, that of his desperate need and that of the moral responsibility he always believed in. If Evelyn were here, he thought, but knowing the answer didn't make the decision any easier. Back in the taxi, Sam started the engine and drove aimlessly for a while until he found Jerry, an old friend and fellow cab driver, at a regular meeting spot. Jerry was leaning against the car, smoking a cigarette, his face marked by years and the bitterness of a life full of regrets. When Sam parked beside him, Jerry flicked the cigarette butt to the ground and looked at him with a half-smile. "You look like hell, Sam," Jerry said, tapping lightly on the roof of Sam's cab. "What happened?" Sam hesitated before speaking, but there was something about Jerry that always made him open up, perhaps because of the frank and cynical way his friend viewed life. They had talked about everything over the years, from financial struggles to the small daily victories of survival in the big city. And that night, Sam needed to hear another opinion, even if he knew it wouldn't be the most correct one. "I found a suitcase," Sam began, his voice low, almost ashamed, "full of money, a huge amount." Jerry raised his eyebrows, surprised. "And you haven't spent it all yet?" he joked, but there was a glint in his eyes, a genuine interest in the story. Sam briefly recounted Elowen's situation and the dilemma that tormented him. Jerry listened in silence, nodding occasionally, and when Sam finished, he let out a bitter laugh. "Let me tell you something, Sam. No one ever did anything for me. No one ever reached out. The world doesn't give second chances. If you have a chance to solve your problems, take it. Because no one will care if you're in the gutter, got it?" He took a drag from his cigarette, Sam's eyes fixed on the ground. Sam felt a knot in his stomach. He had always known Jerry was cynical, but now he saw clearly something that frightened him. Jerry had become exactly what Sam feared becoming: bitter, empty, someone who had given up believing in goodness. And if he kept the money, he would follow the same path, betraying everything he and Evelyn had built together, all the values she believed in. "And then what's left?" Sam asked, not looking at Jerry. "What you make of it. You take care of yourself, and that's it." Jerry shrugged, extinguishing the cigarette with his shoe. "There's nothing more, Sam. That's the world." But Sam knew he couldn't accept that view. He saw in Jerry the reflection of a life he didn't want for himself, a life without love, without compassion. The pain of losing Evelyn was great, but losing himself would be much worse. Back home, Sam entered quietly, trying to avoid the inevitable confrontation with Cecily, but he knew she was waiting. He found her sitting at the kitchen table, the soft light illuminating her face. She had red eyes, clearly having cried, and Sam felt a pang of guilt seeing her like that. "Grandpa," Cecily began, her voice calm but laden with emotion. "I know something is wrong. I know you're hiding something from me, but whatever has happened, I love you. I just can't understand why you lied to me." Her words pierced Sam's heart like a knife. He knew he had broken the trust between them, but hearing Cecily say she loved him made the weight of his choices unbearable. He tried to respond, but his voice failed him. Cecily stood up and walked over to him, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "I forgive you, Grandpa, but you need to tell me the truth." She was resolute, though her eyes were still filled with pain. Sam felt tears welling up, and before he could contain himself, he began to cry. Cecily hugged him tightly as he sobbed, the weight of all his decisions crashing down on him. They cried together, and in that moment the bond between them, though shaken, seemed to heal a little. "I never wanted to disappoint you, Cecily." Sam finally found the words, "but I still don't know what to do." She pulled away, wiping her eyes, and looked at him with the saddest expression he had ever seen. "Grandpa, I can't tell you what's right or wrong for you. But I know that if you do something that destroys you inside, no matter how much money you have, you'll never be the man I knew." Her words penetrated deeply. Sam knew he was still trapped in his dilemma, but now he understood that the choice was not just between money and morality. It was about who he wanted to be and what was left of his own soul. Sam hadn't returned to the hospital in the following days. He tried to keep himself busy, driving the taxi, trying to think about anything other than Eloan or the bag. But guilt followed him like a shadow. Every passenger who got in and out of the taxi seemed to be a reminder of his indecision, as if their eyes were questioning his morality. He knew that at some point he would have to go back and face the situation head-on. One afternoon, Sam decided to drive to a park near the hospital, where he could find some time to reflect away from the chaos of the hospital. He parked the taxi and walked to a bench under the shade of a tree, where he could watch the city's movement without being directly involved. The gentle autumn breeze rustled the leaves around him, bringing an odd relief, though only temporary. As he tried to enjoy this brief moment of peace, he suddenly saw Eloan walking through the park in the distance, her eyes fixed on the ground. She looked worn out, as if she were carrying the weight of 1,000 problems. Sam tensed up, knowing that he couldn't avoid her. It was inevitable. Without wanting to attract attention, he remained seated on the bench, hoping she wouldn't notice him. However, as if guided by some instinct, Eloan spotted Sam in the distance. She hesitated for a moment but then walked towards him. Sam braced himself for the encounter, trying to remain calm. When she approached, her face seemed even more tired than before. "Sam, I didn't expect to see you here," Eloan said, forcing a small smile. I just needed some time to think," he replied, trying to sound casual. They sat in silence for a few moments, simply observing the movement of the park. Sam tried to keep the conversation superficial, but Eloan seemed restless. She finally broke the silence, her anxious gaze returning. "I still haven't found the bag," she said, her voice heavy with frustration and fear. "If I don't get that money soon, my mother won't get the treatment in time." Sam shifted uncomfortably on the bench, His heart raced, and he tried to find words to comfort her, but everything he said felt false, hollow. He knew he was lying to her, even indirectly, and it consumed him inside. "Maybe," he began, trying to avoid the truth. "Maybe things will change suddenly. Sometimes, when everything seems lost, something good happens." Elowen sighed, looking up at the cloudy sky above them. "I'd like to believe that, but time is running out. I'd do anything to get that bag back." She lowered her head, visibly defeated. The discomfort inside Sam was growing. He could no longer handle the tension of being so close to her, knowing that the solution to her problem was in his hands. He looked down at the ground, as if the fallen leaves could offer him some kind of advice or comfort. The silence between them dragged on, and Sam knew he had to speak, had to relieve the weight on his conscience. "Elowen," he started, without really having a plan for what he was going to say next. "Sometimes, life puts us in situations where we don't know what to do." Elowen looked at him, not fully understanding where he was going with this. "I understand that," she replied, her voice still marked by hopelessness. Sam continued, unable to hold back. "And sometimes when we think we're doing the right thing, we end up getting lost and making mistakes. And," he began stuttering, the words spilling out uncontrollably. "The bag. I... Before he could finish the sentence, he realized what he was saying. It was too late. The words had escaped before he could stop them. Elowen looked at him suddenly, her eyes wide. "What?" she asked, her tone shifting to a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I have the bag," Sam confessed, unable to hold back anymore. His hands began to tremble, and he saw the absolute shock on Elowen's face. The revelation hit like a bomb, and the silence that followed was heavy, almost unbearable. You have the bag? All this time?" Elowen whispered, tears of desperation and anger beginning to form in her eyes. Sam's heart was racing so fast that he could hardly think. Elowen's look, filled with disbelief and hurt, paralyzed him, and he didn't know how to fix the situation. He had imagined so many ways to tell the truth, but none of them involved this sudden, uncontrolled revelation. He wasn't ready to face the consequences now, face to face. Desperation took hold of Sam, and without thinking, he suddenly stood up. Elowen, even more stunned, took a step back. "Sam, wait! She started to speak, but Sam had already started running. He ran through the park, not knowing where he was going, only knowing that he needed to escape the unbearable situation. His mind was in chaos, his emotions raw. Elowen stood there, watching as he ran away, her hands covering her mouth in shock. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. The man who until then had seemed like an ally, someone who was on her side, was in fact holding the very thing that could save her mother. Elowen, confused and devastated, stood frozen in the park, unable to process what had just happened. After the tumultuous encounter in the park, Sam spent the following days trying to process everything that had happened. He could barely handle the weight of having accidentally revealed that he was in possession of Elowen's bag and then fleeing. Guilt consumed him, and he felt trapped, unsure of how to fix things. Cecily noticed that something was deeply wrong, but Sam couldn't bring himself to tell her everything, still embarrassed by his impulsive reaction. That morning, while they were having coffee, Cecily finally decided to confront him. "Grandpa, you're different. I can see that something is bothering you, something big. Please, tell me what's going on. I don't want you to go through this alone." Sam looked at her, and for a moment he struggled against the urge to keep hiding the truth. But he knew that Cecily had the right to know. Taking a deep breath, he began to tell the story, starting from the day he found the bag to the moment he inadvertently revealed to Elowen that he had it. Cecily listened attentively, her face initially marked by surprise and then by understanding. When Sam finished, her expression was calm, without judgment. "So that's why you've been so upset?" She sighed and took his hand. "Grandpa, we need to fix this. You have to return the bag, but not just that. I think you should go see Elowen, talk to her in person, calmly. Nothing will get resolved if you keep running away." Sam lowered his eyes, feeling the weight of Cecily's words. She was right, as always. He couldn't keep avoiding Elowen, and the bag couldn't remain hidden in his house, like a silent burden. But beyond that, he felt he needed to do more. That just returning the bag wouldn't be enough to repair the damage he had caused. "I know, Cecily, but I'm scared of how she'll react. And deep down, I don't know if returning the bag will be enough to fix what I've done." Cecily squeezed his hand tighter. "You'll find out, but only if you have the courage to face her again, and this time without running away." Sam spent days thinking about the best way to approach Elowen again. He understood that returning the bag was only part of the process. After deep reflection, an idea began to form in his mind. Something more personal, something that could truly show Elowen that he didn't want to just correct his mistake, but that he genuinely cared about what she was going through. That afternoon, Sam walked into a modest jewelry store downtown. He had decided to use the little money he had saved over the years for a gesture that went beyond the bag. He chose a silver pendant with a symbol of hope, a small tree of life. Evelyn, his late wife, used to wear a similar pendant when they were together, a reminder that life, even in the hardest moments, could be reborn. With the gift in hand, Sam felt a little more confident. He didn't want to just return the money and run away again. He wanted to show Elowen that there was a way to move forward, that he understood what it was like to fight not to lose someone you love, just as he had fought not to lose Cecily after his daughter's death. "Grandpa, what did you buy?" Cecily asked when Sam got home, curious about the small package in his hand. Sam looked at the gift and smiled faintly. "Something to try to show that I'm sorry. Something I hope means more than just words." He paused and sighed. "And tomorrow, I'm going to meet Elowen. This time, I won't run away." Cecily was silent for a moment, then smiled back. "I'm proud of you, Grandpa. I know it's hard, but you're doing the right thing." The next day, Sam went to the cafe where he hoped to find Elowen. This time, he was more prepared, more determined. He wasn't just carrying the bag. He also had the small gift, an attempt to symbolize something greater than the simple return of money. Elowen was already there, sitting at a table near the window. When she saw him enter, her eyes narrowed for a moment, distrust clearly etched on her face. Sam knew that this conversation wouldn't be easy, but he had emotionally prepared himself for whatever came next. He walked over to her table and sat down. "I'm really sorry for running off like that, Elowen," Sam began, his voice sincere. "I should have handled this differently, but I was so afraid of making the wrong choice that I ended up making it worse." Elowen sat in silence, clearly processing his words. "I brought the bag." He placed the bag on the table, watching as relief and tension battled for control over her expression. "But I wanted to give you something more." Sam then placed the small package on the table. Elowen looked at him surprised. "What is this?" she asked, suspicious. "A gift. A symbol of hope," Sam replied, gently pushing the package toward her. "It's something that means a lot to me. My wife used to wear a pendant like this, and she believed that, even in the toughest times, there was always a way to start over." Elowen opened the package and saw the silver pendant shine under the cafe lights. She looked at Sam, words escaping her. "I wanted to tell you that, beyond returning the money, I'm here to help you in any way I can," Sam continued, his emotions raw. "Because I understand what it's like to fight, not to lose someone you love. And I know that just returning the bag won't erase what happened, but it's what I can do right now." Elowen remained silent for a long moment, gazing at the pendant in her hands. Tears slowly welled up in her eyes, and she shook her head, finally breaking the silence. "I don't know what to say. Thank you, Sam. This means more than you can imagine." Sam, with misty eyes, felt that for the first time he had taken a real step toward truly making amends. If you've made it this far, it means you're feeling as moved by this story as I am. So don't forget to subscribe, like the video, and leave your comments. Your engagement is crucial for the channel's growth. Let's continue with this amazing journey. After returning the bag and handing over the pendant, Sam walked home feeling lighter, though still not completely at peace. The weight of the past weeks lingered over him. Cecily noticed her grandfather's prolonged silence but understood that he needed time to process everything that had happened. This was not a situation that would resolve itself overnight, but the act of returning the bag and the gift given to Elowen had been significant steps. One morning, as Sam sat quietly sipping his coffee, the phone rang. He answered, expecting a routine call, perhaps from a passenger or a bill collector. However, the voice on the other end caught him by surprise. "Sam, it's Jerry. Can we talk?" Jerry's voice was hoarse, and Sam immediately knew this would not be a simple conversation. Reluctantly, Sam agreed and arranged to meet Jerry in the same park where he had met Elowen. The weather was chillier, and autumn leaves already blanketed the ground, creating a melancholic scene. When Jerry showed up, he lit a cigarette and walked over to Sam with a face etched in the bitterness he often wore. "I heard you returned the money," Jerry began, exhaling smoke. "Is that true?" Sam nodded in silence, aware that Jerry's reaction would not be favorable. "Sam, you're an idiot!" Jerry shook his head in disbelief. "Do you really think anyone would do the same for you? Do you think life is fair? That money could have solved all your problems, but you chose to be the hero and give it all back." Jerry's voice grew increasingly bitter. "Life isn't like that, Sam. No one gives you anything for free. You're going to regret this decision." Sam sighed, letting Jerry's words echo with the skepticism he anticipated. However, something inside him had shifted. He no longer felt trapped by fear or guilt. He looked at his friend and responded with a calmness that surprised even himself. "Life has never been about what's fair, Jerry," Sam said, meeting his friend's gaze. "But I realized it's not about that. It's about what's right, and I don't want to spend the rest of my life burdened with the guilt of keeping something that wasn't mine while someone else suffered because of it." Jerry stared at him for a moment, shocked by Sam's conviction. He exhaled another puff of smoke, visibly frustrated. "You're going to regret it, Sam," he repeated before turning and walking away through the park, leaving Sam alone. Sam knew that was the end of his friendship with Jerry. They had chosen different paths, and Sam was at peace with his choice, even knowing that the future remained uncertain. After that encounter, Sam returned home and sat in the armchair he used to share with Evelyn. The cold afternoon wind blew through the slightly open window, but he didn't mind. He had much to ponder. His thoughts drifted back to moments with his wife and daughter. Evelyn had always been his moral compass, a strong and generous woman who always did what was right, even if it meant sacrificing her own comfort. Sam recalled how she faced life's difficulties, always prioritizing compassion for others. Now he saw Evelyn's reflection in Cecily, with her determination and generous heart. Thinking of the pendant he had given to Elowen, Sam felt a connection to his wife. The gift was not just a material gesture. It was a symbol of what he had always believed but had forgotten over time. Life was not measured only by the hardships they faced, but by how they handled those hardships. The choice to return the bag was not merely a moral reckoning. It was a way to honor Evelyn's memory and live according to the principles she had always upheld. And now, even with an uncertain future, he knew he was on the right path. He couldn't control what lay ahead, but he was finally free from the weight of his past choices. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath, feeling the cold air fill his lungs. Evelyn would be proud of him, just as Cecily was. Later that afternoon, Sam decided to take a walk in the park. The biting cold of early winter was beginning to creep in, but he enjoyed the silence that the season brought. As he walked along the trails covered in dry leaves, he spotted a father playing with his son, laughing as the boy ran between the trees. It was a simple scene, but something about it touched Sam deeply. For a moment he saw himself in that father's place. He remembered the days he played with his daughter, Evelyn, by his side, watching with a loving smile. That time felt so distant, but the memories flooded back with overwhelming clarity, as if everything had happened just yesterday. Sam stopped, watching the scene with tear-filled eyes. That father had no idea he was living the best moments of his life. And in that instant, Sam understood something greater. By returning the bag and acting with compassion, he wasn't just saving Elowen's mother's life. He was rescuing something within himself that had been lost over time. He was, in a way, restoring the dignity and love he had lost along with his wife and daughter. With tears in his eyes, Sam took a deep breath and felt a sense of peace and completeness he hadn't felt in a long time. He knew he had made the right choice, and he was finally at peace with himself. He looked up at the gray sky and smiled. The weight he had carried had vanished. Now, he understood that the true sacrifice was not in returning the money, but in letting go of fear and guilt. He was ready to face whatever the future held, with his head held high. The next morning, Sam woke up more determined than ever. His meeting with Jerry had marked the end of an old friendship, but it also reinforced his conviction that he was on the right path. He looked out the window and saw the weak morning sun filtering through the curtains. The weight that had accompanied him for the past few weeks felt lighter now, almost as if it were slowly dissipating. Sam descended the stairs and found Cecily already having coffee in the kitchen. When she saw him, she broke into a warm smile, as if she sensed the change in her grandfather's demeanor. "Ready for today?" she asked, excited. Sam nodded. He was ready. It was the day he would see Elowen again, but this time he knew things would be different. After returning the suitcase and offering the pendant, he didn't just want to close that chapter. He wanted to build something new, a bridge stronger than guilt and past mistakes. "Yes, I'm ready," Sam said with a serene confidence. Cecily grabbed her coat, and together they left the house. As they drove through the streets of New York, the silence between them was no longer uncomfortable. There was a shared calm, a mutual understanding that they were doing what was right. Cecily held her grandfather's hand for a moment, offering him the silent support he so desperately needed. When they arrived at the cafe where Sam had first met Elowen, the tension returned, but it felt different now. Sam sensed that finally closure was in sight, a way to finish what had started, not with fear, but with courage. Across the street, he spotted Elowen. She was sitting, absent-mindedly staring at the coffee cup in front of her, still unaware of Sam's presence. He took a deep breath, feeling a mix of nerves and determination as he prepared for what was to come next. Sam and Cecily crossed the street and approached Elowen's table. Upon noticing them, Elowen looked up, her eyes showing surprise and a hint of caution. Sam could see the marks of tension on her face, but also something different: hope. Cecily, with her usual reassuring smile, broke the ice. "Elowen," she said gently, "may we sit?" Elowen nodded, although she still appeared uncertain about what to expect from this meeting. Sam sat down next to Cecily. The suitcase had already been returned, taking with it the material weight of the situation. But what remained was something much deeper, something emotional. "I wanted to thank you for the other day," Elowen began, her voice still hesitant, as if she didn't quite know what to say. "When you returned the suitcase, I didn't expect that gesture. The pendant. It meant so much more than you can imagine." Sam felt the warmth of gratitude in her words, but also the shadow of sadness that still lingered over the situation. He leaned slightly forward, his hands resting on the table. "I wish I had done this sooner, Elowen," he said, his voice steady but filled with emotion. but fear held me back. I was cowardly, and that complicated everything. But now I understand that it took more than just returning what didn't belong to me. I wanted to show that I care, that I understand what you're going through." Elowen listened intently, and when Sam finished, she sighed, her eyes misty. "My mother always said that, in the end, what matters isn't the things we own, but the people we care for," Elowen said, tears threatening to spill. "And I think you proved that. I just hope she can receive treatment in time." Sam glanced at Cecily for a moment, their eyes meeting. They both knew that regardless of what happened with Elowen's mother, this moment was a turning point. "If there's anything else we can do," Cecily began, but Elowen raised her hand, smiling faintly. "You've already done more than I could have imagined." As they continued to talk, a voice interrupted the moment. Sam turned and saw a man approaching. It was Dr. Roberts, the doctor treating Elowen's mother. He wore an expression of surprise and satisfaction, something Sam hadn't expected to see. "Elowen, I was looking for you." The doctor smiled, placing a hand on her shoulder. "I have good news. Your mother's condition has improved considerably in the last 24 hours. It seems the treatment is working, and if it continues like this, we have a good chance of a full recovery." Elowen was taken aback, her eyes widening as she tried to process what the doctor had just said. Her hands began to tremble, and the tears that had once been of fear and despair now flowed in a mix of relief and happiness. "She will be okay?" Elowen asked, almost in disbelief. "We still have a way to go, but she's responding better than we expected. The donations that came in allowed us to start more intensive treatment, and now it seems we're on the right track." Overcome with emotion, Elowen stood up and hugged the doctor, barely able to contain her tears. When she finally let go, she turned to Sam and Cecily, who watched the scene in silence, absorbing the impact of the news. "You saved her life," Elowen said, her voice choked with gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you." Sam, with misty eyes, felt a wave of relief and peace wash over him. All the guilt, fear, and indecision that had tormented him for weeks seemed to have finally dissipated. He looked at Cecily, who was smiling, moved by the outcome. "You don't have to thank us, Elowen," Sam said with a sincere smile. "I gained something from this too. You helped me find something I had lost a long time ago." Elowen, still crying, smiled through her tears. The cycle of fear and uncertainty had finally been broken. Sam felt that, in some way, he was also healing by helping to save a life. At that moment, he understood that his journey wasn't just about doing the right thing, but about reconnecting with the essence of who he had always been, a man driven by love and compassion. A month had passed since Sam returned the suitcase to Elowen and received the news of her mother's improvement. Life had returned to an almost normal rhythm for him and Cecily. Although the burden of guilt had lessened, Sam still felt the weight of the financial struggles they faced. The debts continued to pile up, and he knew that sooner or later he would have to confront the reality of their situation. One morning, while sipping his coffee at the kitchen table, Sam watched Cecily studying. She had always been a dedicated young woman, doing her best to keep up with her studies despite the challenges. But Sam knew how overwhelmed she was. College demanded a lot, and he feared that without the necessary resources, Cecily might have to abandon her dreams. "Grandpa, are you okay?" Cecily asked, interrupting his thoughts. Sam smiled faintly, but there was a sadness in his eyes that Cecily quickly noticed. He understood that she needed college for a better future, but with taxi work becoming scarcer, he simply couldn't keep up with the expenses. "I'm fine, dear. Just thinking about a few things," he said, trying to mask his worries. Cecily gave a half smile, but she knew that things were getting increasingly difficult for her grandfather, and it deeply concerned her. Suddenly the phone rang. Sam answered, somewhat distracted, not recognizing the number. "Hello?" he said. "Sam, it's Elowen. I really wanted to talk to you. Can we meet today? I have something important to tell you." Sam was taken aback. The last month had been more peaceful since the suitcase incident. Elowen and he had exchanged a few messages, but they hadn't seen each other since then. He hesitated for a moment, intrigued. "Sure, Elowen, where shall we meet?" She suggested a nearby cafe, and Sam accepted the invitation, unsure of what to expect. Sam arrived at the cafe a few hours later and spotted Elowen sitting at their usual spot. She seemed calmer, as if the tension of the past months had finally lifted. When Sam approached, she smiled warmly. "Sam, thank you for coming," she said. "I wanted to share some things that have happened since we last met." He sat down, patiently waiting as Elowen took a sip of her coffee, searching for the right words. "My mother is much better now. She's not fully recovered, but the doctors are optimistic." She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "And I could never have done it without you. What you did changed everything." Sam nodded, feeling a wave of relief and joy upon hearing the good news. But there was something more in Elowen's eyes, something indicating that she wasn't finished. "After everything that happened, I started reflecting on many things. And I realized that you and your granddaughter are also going through hardships. You mentioned something about Cecily's college, right?" Sam hesitated, surprised by the change in direction of the conversation. "Yes, we're facing some problems, but we'll manage. I always find a way," he replied, trying to maintain his pride. Elowen shook her head understandingly. "Sam, you helped me when I was at my most desperate moment, and now I want to give back in some way. I found out that my mother, before she got sick, had saved some money for me. She never told me about it, but now, with her recovery, we've been able to access those resources, and I would like to help Cecily continue her studies." Sam was completely taken aback. Elowen's words caught him off guard, and he didn't know how to respond. Elowen wanted to pay for his granddaughter's college? How could he accept something so generous? "Elowen, I can't accept that. You've been through so much already. I don't want you to feel like you owe me anything," Sam said, his voice trembling with emotion. Elowen smiled, her expression filled with kindness. "You don't understand, Sam. It's not about owing. I want to do this. Your kindness gave me the chance to save my mother, and I want to give you and Cecily the chance to continue dreaming. Please, let me give back." Sam remained silent for a few moments, feeling tears welling in his eyes. He had always believed that returning the suitcase was necessary, but he never expected anything like this to happen. What he did for Elowen was not for reward, but because it was the right thing to do. Now, however, life seemed to be returning something he never imagined having. "I don't know what to say, Elowen," he murmured, his voice choked. It's more than I could ever imagine, but I never wanted anything in return." "And that's exactly why you deserve this help," Elowen replied, her voice gentle yet firm. "Cecily has so much potential. She's an amazing young woman, and I know that with this help, she will achieve everything she dreams of." Sam looked at Elowen, feeling his heart swell with gratitude. Her words were sincere, and he knew that refusing this help would be like turning down a new opportunity that life was offering, not just to him, but to the granddaughter he loved dearly. I accept," Sam finally said, "but only because I know this will help Cecily have the future she deserves." Elowen smiled, relieved, and then Sam realized that this moment was a perfect conclusion to the cycle that began with a lost suitcase and a moral dilemma. He had learned that life, no matter how tough it was, had a way of giving back what we sow, whether it be compassion or love. Later, when he returned home and told Cecily about Elowen's offer, she was left speechless, her eyes shining with emotion. They embraced, and Sam realized that finally the darkness of their struggles had given way to the light of new hopes. In that moment, he understood that by helping Elowen, he had unknowingly helped himself and his granddaughter find a new chance for the future. A month had passed since Elowen offered to help pay for Cecily's education, and things had started to improve in surprising ways. Cecily was enrolled in an advanced college program, receiving additional scholarships thanks to Elowen's support, and Sam, although still working as a taxi driver, no longer felt overwhelmed by debt. There was a lightness in his life that he hadn't felt in years. One quiet autumn afternoon, Sam was sorting through some items in the attic, something he had always put off. He came across old boxes full of papers and mementos that belonged to Evelyn, his late wife. As he rummaged through the yellowed papers, he found a small blue notebook that looked like a diary or a notepad. Evelyn's name was scribbled on the cover, and Sam, overcome by nostalgia, decided to open it and flip through the pages, diving into memories of his wife. He read about moments they had shared, small details of their life together that he had forgotten. Among these pages, one particular note caught his attention. It was from many years ago and mentioned the name of a young woman Evelyn had helped while volunteering at a community center. "Today I met such a brave woman. She is struggling to raise her daughter alone without many resources. Her name is Mara, and her daughter, Elowen, is just a child. I want to do everything I can to help them." The name Elowen made him stop immediately. He reread the line, feeling a chill run down his spine. Could it be the same Elowen? He hurried down the stairs, the notebook still in hand, his heart racing as he tried to process what he had just read. After the revelation in Evelyn's notebook, Sam decided he needed to meet Elowen's mother in person. The impact of knowing that his wife had helped Mara so many years ago filled him with a strong desire to thank her for everything, even though he had never known that part of their past. The next day, he and Cecily went to the hospital where Mara was still receiving treatment. The tension hung in the air, but this time Sam felt no fear or insecurity. He felt guided by something greater, as if he were finally completing a journey that Evelyn had begun. Elowen was waiting for them in the corridor of the ward where her mother was hospitalized. When she saw Sam and Cecily approaching, her face lit up with a smile, although her eyes still showed signs of fatigue. "She's awake today," Elowen said softly. "I think it would be good for you to meet her." Sam nodded, and along with Cecily, followed Elowen to the hospital room. There, lying in bed, was Mara. She looked fragile, but there was a spark in her eyes that conveyed strength. When Sam entered, Mara's gaze locked onto him, and for a moment, silence filled the room. "You are Evelyn's husband, aren't you?" Mara asked, her voice low but filled with deep emotion. Sam was taken aback. He hadn't expected her to know who he was, and it caught him off guard. "Yes, I'm Sam, Evelyn's husband," he replied, his voice trembling. Mara smiled faintly, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Evelyn, she saved me in so many ways. I always wanted to thank her, but life took me away from the opportunities. And now, seeing you here, I feel like I can finally express my gratitude," Mara said, her sincerity touching Sam profoundly. Elowen stood beside her mother, holding her hand, visibly moved. Sam took a step forward, feeling a lump in his throat. "I don't know if it was coincidence or destiny, but it seems we are all connected by something that started many years ago," Sam said, his voice choked with emotion. "I had no idea Evelyn had helped you. I only discovered this yesterday, and now everything makes sense." Mara looked at Sam and Cecily, tears beginning to stream down her face. "She gave me strength to carry on when I thought I couldn't, and now you are here, returning that strength when I need it most. You have no idea how important this all is to me." Sam could no longer hold back his tears. He had spent years blaming himself for not being able to save Evelyn, for losing so much. But now he saw that her generosity continued to thrive, transcending time and connecting people in unexpected ways. "We didn't save you, Mara," Sam said, his voice filled with emotion. "It was Evelyn. She is present in all of this, and I think she knew that one day these stories would intertwine again." The atmosphere in the room was thick with emotion when Mara, still holding Alowan's hand, gestured for Sam and Cecily to come closer. "I need to tell you something," Mara said, looking at Alowan and then at Sam. "There's something Evelyn did for me, something that changed the course of my life and that, until now, only I knew." Sam and Cecily exchanged glances, sensing that something significant was about to be revealed. "When Alowan was still very small," Mara continued, her eyes filled with memories, "I was going through one of the toughest phases of my life. I had nothing, no money, no hope. That's when I met Evelyn. She worked at the community center, and I could barely muster the courage to ask for help. But Evelyn, she saw what I was going through without me needing to say a word. And one day, after talking with me, she gave me something I've never told anyone." Mara paused, trying to control the tears that were accumulating in her eyes. Elowen looked at her mother, confused, trying to understand what she was about to reveal. "Evelyn gave me an envelope full of money," Mara said, her voice trembling. "She never told me where it came from. She just said I should use it to start over. Thanks to that, I was able to take care of Elowen, pay our bills, and get back on my feet. I never told Elowen because I didn't want her to grow up with the weight of that story. But Sam, your wife was the reason I survived that time. She didn't just save my life. She saved my daughter's future." Sam and Cecily were left speechless. Sam had never known this story. He knew Evelyn was generous, but he never imagined she had done something so significant, something that had impacted a life so profoundly. Mara looked at Elowen, her eyes filled with tenderness. "It was Evelyn who gave you the chance to grow up, Elowen. Without her, we wouldn't be here now." Elowen, tears streaming down her face, hugged her mother tightly. Words could barely express the moment, but the understanding between them was clear. Sam, too, felt that the cycle had closed in a way he never could have imagined. Evelyn, even after her death, remained present. Her generosity had planted seeds that were now blooming, not only in the lives of Mara and Elowen, but also in Cecily's and his own. Evelyn's legacy was not merely a memory, it was a living force, uniting people and transforming suffering into hope. Sam, filled with a profound sense of peace, approached Mara and Elowen, placing his hand on their shoulders. In that moment, he understood that Evelyn's love and compassion would continue to guide their lives. And now he was certain that she was still present in every choice they made, in every act of kindness they shared. In that instant, Sam finally found what he had been searching for: a meaning for the pain, a reason for the sacrifice. At the end of this emotional journey, we saw that true wealth doesn't lie in a bag full of money, but in the choices we make and how they impact the lives around us. The taxi driver faced his greatest dilemma, and with a simple act of compassion, he transformed the fate of two families. This story reminds us that sometimes personal sacrifice can be the greatest act of love, and that the easiest path isn't always the right one. And you, if you were in his place, what would you do? How do our decisions shape who we are and the world around us? Now, I want to know what you thought of this story. What touched you the most? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the next videos. Leave a like, comment your thoughts, and share with those who love a good story. And don't forget to click on the card that's appearing on the screen to watch the next video. Thank you so much for watching.